All right, everyone. This is Razib Khan with Josiah Neely, and we are here for conversation number 35. So I think we were both at the Natal conference this weekend here in Austin, so we're going to talk about that. But I want to talk about other things first. So um, the Greenland stuff, and I think some of the foreign policy stuff that's happening with the Trump administration has been going a little wild recently, or it's back in the news. And so I guess I'll talk a little bit about that because I'm kind of pro annexation of Greenland. I'm actually pro annexation of Canada, as some of you know. I'm starting to think that the Trump administration's behavior is counterproductive rather than productive. And to be honest, for me, it's not just a joke. I actually think it would be great. I think it would be good for the Greenlanders. I think it would be good for America. It's 56,000 people. We could give them money, all these things. I mean, there's reasons, there's strategic reasons. But the way it's happening right now, um, it's not as funny anymore, I think, for a lot of people. And it doesn't seem like it's super popular in the US. So I don't really know what's going on at this point. Like what they think the end game is. I mean, I guess I should just say something about the art of the deal because that's pretty much what all of my friends, when I expressed a little confusion about what's going on, they just say, "Well, if you read Art of the Deal, this just all makes sense," you know. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I have read Art of the Deal, so I don't know if that helps or not. I used to be more supportive of annexing Greenland than I currently am. I mean, I'm not against it, obviously, but one thing is, as I looked into it, it seems even though we don't own Greenland, like pretty much all most of the stuff that we would get out of buying Greenland, we already have. So they already let us use it for military purposes. Space Force is there, other stuff, um, and they have like some minerals there or whatnot. But we can mine minerals. You don't have to own a place to mine minerals, and so even with that, I'm not against buying Greenland for the right price, but I actually think like the way we're going about it, um, we could in like right now we're able to use Greenland for all this, without owning it for all this other stuff. But the way things are going, maybe that might change. If we piss off Denmark enough, probably not. But it is a little weird. And then Canada, I do not want to be part of the United States. Um, so yeah, I don't, and it's a little strange just because these were not big issues during the campaign. Trump, of course, I think there was something during the Trump one administration where there was some talk about buying Greenland or whatever, but certainly. I don't know if he ever mentioned it while he was running. Certainly, he didn't mention the stuff about Canada being the 51st state, right? That was not something that was going on, and it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I don't think it would be good if it were to happen. Um, so I don't know the point. Maybe it's like I've thought like maybe is this some sort of you know 3D chess move with regard to Russia and Ukraine? Either trying to like get a deal done there or distract from the fact that a deal's not getting done. I don't know. So I don't know what the deal is. I still don't think we're at the point where it's a huge problem, because um, while I'm sure, well, the Greenland thing I don't think is a huge problem. It's annoying to Denmark, but I don't think it's going to change anything. Actually, the Canada stuff has already kind of changed things in the sense that and we may have discussed this before, but they're about to have an election there, and the Liberals, the ruling Liberal Party, had been on track to be totally wiped out. They were really, really down to the Conservatives, and they got, Trudeau, was the prime minister. He stepped down in favor of this guy Mark Carney, who's doesn't have the same foul odor among the Canadian populace as Trudeau. So they were probably going to recover a little bit from that. But now, if you just look at the polling, um, it's clear that all this Trump stuff has really hurt the conservatives to the point where the liberals, I mean, they're basically tied in the polls. Maybe even the liberals now have a slight advantage, right? And that's, on one level, okay, Canada is not my country, so whatever. But even for all this stuff that Trump cares about, it probably, like, it would be easier for him to work with a conservative Canadian government than with a liberal Canadian government, So it doesn't. So that does seem like it's having real world negative consequences, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the reason you don't want Canada as 51st state is an American state
The Canadians.
gets 2 senators, and also Canada has 40 million people,
Right,
and you are apportioned to the House of Representatives based on how many people you have. Canada would be a bigger state population-wise than California.
right.
So it would probably be like an immediate, like, natural Democratic majority,
It would,
which
yeah, and if you didn't break it up, if you had it just as one state, um, it would be so big that I feel like it would scramble politics in all sorts of unforeseen ways as well, right? Because they would want to split into different states, and like, imagine it's not only like it's one state that's really big, but then that state also includes Quebec, right? So yeah,
yeah.
so I don't. I mean, to the extent that I can imagine, I mean, like, in theory, does there have to be a border on that parallel or whatever? No, it would probably it's probably economically would be better for the Canadians. Like, they're a poorer country than we are, and they would probably gain more from, like, if Canada was a 51st state, there's no tariffs. Um, so those sorts of things I think would be good, but just like the political economy of it is awful.
Well, okay, so just to be clear, and I think listeners know this, my attitude, to the Canadian question and all this stuff is, I don't want them to be a state. Uh,
You want them to
I
be
want
like
them to
Puerto
be some
Rico
sort of
or
yeah, like a territory,
yeah,
I want them
Guam,
to have no voting rights,
right?
but I do want them to have work rights, work permits, all those sorts of things. I think it's like an economically and
Yeah,
geopolitically good solution. They can have self-governing, they can keep their, they could be like, yeah, like Puerto Rico, whatever, American Samoa, you know?
Israel
It's
has the
like
West Bank. We could have the North Bank. Canada, our occupied
yeah,
territory.
although we don't again, like, I think it would be fine. I would like total, work permits and, like, total ability to travel, like, within the Schengen zone. It's just that
Yeah,
I just don't want Canadians to vote. That's it. So I think
right.
that would preserve, our status quo. You know, there's also issues with Europe right now. Let's speak a little bit about that foreign policy. I mean, I don't keep track of all of these details, but there are the general problems that people complain about. Europeans don't, we give basically we make it so they don't need as strong of an army, as much of a military industrial complex. Some people argue that that's actually good for us. We get so many benefits out of that. Uh, but other people say that it's annoying and they should step up. So Trump has that opinion, uh, and a lot of people actually agree with him, including non-Republican. It's a pretty broad
Right.
ideologically broad opinion. Problem is the way he's behaving is that, just like with Denmark, but maybe to a moderate degree, he is antagonistic. He's trying to engage in bilateral brinkmanship, it seems to me, with our allies. And again, they're just getting annoyed. But like, are we really at the end of the day not going to be allied with Europe? I mean, I think we will be,
Right. Yeah.
So I wonder about like what the end game there is.
Yeah. I don't. Europe has always had a kind of testy relationship with Republican presidents, it's always for a different reason. You know, they didn't like Bush because of the Iraq stuff and other things like that, and then they didn't like Reagan back in the Cold War, whatever. Um, I don't, yeah, ultimately, I don't like fundamentally. I don't know that the relationship's going to change that much. Um, and it's all, you know, there's always been some tension and hostility with the Republican president. You know, as if we're in the realm of Canada and annexing Canada as ideas, one thing, and I should say I'm not really an expert in this stuff, but we're always trying to get European countries to spend more on their own defense, right? So the logic being that then we wouldn't have to spend as much, something like that. Um, and of course, there's a lot of cajoling, a lot of talk, right, to try and do that. Maybe there's some like behind the scenes levers of pressure or whatever. But one thing I wondered is like, well, why don't instead of that, because that doesn't seem like that's going to happen, and I don't know, we're still going to be there either way. Instead of doing that, why don't we just have them pay us to support them, right? It's like you don't actually have to pay to boost up your own military, just pay us, to be there, like the Roman tribute system or whatever, and then that would also help with our budget deficit or something like that. I don't know. So that probably what wouldn't work for all sorts of reasons, but that's my perspective on the whole thing. Is like, well, why don't we just keep doing it, and then they can just give us money for it, like keeping Suez open, right? Other stuff like that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think what a lot of people would appreciate, I mean, I would appreciate is just transparency, okay?
Right,
And
right.
if it's, like, a beneficial relationship for both America and Europe, that's great. I mean, obviously, like, everyone's in favor of win-win relationships. It's just, like, let's just make it transparent, like, how much is this costing the Europeans? Are they getting their money's worth, et cetera, like, they can evaluate, and we can evaluate, and I think that's the point that I think a lot of people can get behind. So, um, I wanna actually, like, pivot really quickly 'cause, I think we've talked in general about the foreign policy stuff, before, and I just wanna do kind of a status check on that. But, there's been a lot of things with, detentions related to ICE, and, again, like, gotta be careful with some of the media stories because you might not know the whole, everything, and I think there's a fair number of people who are being detained, there's know, people with criminal backgrounds, other things like that. But there are a couple of cases that are in the media that are, um, you know, disturbing people, and making them object. So I think I think a student at MIT from Turkey, a woman. She signed it was either MIT or Harvard. She signed an op-ed
Yeah.
that was, pro-Palestinian or something, and that seems to be the cause. The reason, that, her visa status is being revoked. And, just to not to relitigate this, but just so everyone knows, like, if you're not, a green card or an American citizen, a green card holder, first of all, your visa status is very conditional,
Right.
and if you're a green card holder, that as well is somewhat conditional. For example, if you commit a felony, you're out. But there's other things as there are certain laws that are being used now about aliens and their hostility to the United States. And on the margin, I mean, there's definitely cases where people, even with green cards, should be kicked out of the country. I mean, that's obvious, right? Like if
Yeah.
we had, I don't know, like what if like an example is like what if Saeed Qutb, the guy who became really famous during the Al Qaeda times because he was an intellectual influence, what if
Yeah.
American citizen and got a green card, okay?
Right.
But, like, you read his writing, you're like, "Okay, this guy should not be in America," okay? That totally makes sense to me, you know? The question is, like, some of these cases, I personally feel, they're either on the bubble or, like, I don't think that the administration should do this partly because, even if it can legally, even if the courts uphold it, it's gonna be used against people in the future that, you know it's gonna be using I mean, When does
Well,
Sebastian Gorka become a citizen? You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying things like that,
right,
you know?
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, I mean, that's possible. I was actually thinking it's like, I don't know, it's actually a little hard to think of circumstances in which it could be used against MAGA just because there aren't really a any serious constituency of pro MAGA green card holders or people who come here on
Well, yeah, I would say, maybe Cubans.
well, yeah, but I mean the Cubans are all they're all like citizens basically at this point, you know. Um,
They're
so
still coming though, you know?
yeah, occasionally. I mean, so it's possible, but I think in general, um, also there's just and this is a little different, but there's a different there's like more of a tradition of activism, I would say, on the left, you know. So I suspect, and again, there could be like you could come up with some examples, I guess, maybe, but for the most part, like if you're a minded immigrant, you probably are more likely to just keep your head down and be like, well like, what are you talking about? I'm not a citizen. I'm here on
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or whatever. Um, so and like even stuff. Because I was thinking, it's like, well, what could they use? Because a lot of the stuff is about criticism of U.S. policy towards Israel or even Israel policy in Gaza. Or it's like the common theme for a lot of this stuff, you know? And so I was thinking, well, what if it was a different issue? What if it was like, because like basically, and I'm a free speech person, but at the same time, I do notice that even though a lot of the people who are falling afoul of this stuff, it's over Israel. Probably, I mean, I have my Bayesian priors that they probably have some issues with America too, you know. And if Israel were not an issue, uh, I don't know, like in Britain, I think they have like a statute to talk about like undesirable aliens, you know, people who are here who are like causing trouble or whatever. And if you're like a Palestinian activist or whatever, even if Palestine was not an issue, you know, maybe you'd be an activist on something else that wouldn't annoy me. But I was thinking, well, what if it was something like else? So, like, what if they were deporting people because they didn't support same-sex marriage, right? You know, and even there, like, seems like okay, I don't, on an objective level, I don't think you should do that. But the people who would actually run afoul of that, would they be my friends? Would they be MAGA people? No, I don't think so. They would probably be the people at the pro-Palestine protests, right? It's the same people.
Yeah.
So, um, it, you know, I'm sure from the perspective of the administration, actually, they don't have to worry about this turnabout is fair play stuff that much, right? You know, because that's part of being America first. And I haven't followed the details on all the specific cases, I don't like that the one with the op-ed. I haven't read the op-ed, so I don't know. People have said actually it's
Yeah,
not
yeah, that'd be
technical or something, so I don't know. Um, but if you're, I mean, as a general matter, if you're like here on a student visa and you publish an op-ed that says, we need communism, like in the United States or whatever, uh, even if like that's not illegal, that's not a crime, but I would not want that person in this country, you know?
yeah, yeah, no, that's fair. And when you get naturalized, you get asked about communism still, or at least I did.
Right,
This was
yeah.
like 25 years ago or whatever. It was a long time ago, but, more than 25
Yeah,
years ago, but,
I think it's like, okay, yeah, my recollection is, and you since you went through it probably know better, but they they asked about like communism, anarchism, and polygamy. That's my recollection, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, it was weird, yeah, the last 2 were like, "Wait, what?" Because like, I didn't, I mean, I did, like, read well, I don't know, I didn't really prepare. It was fine, I
Right, yeah.
mean, it wasn't that such like So, I mean, I had, I've been living in this country since I was a little kid, so it was like, "Ah, whatever," my English is
Right, right,
fine
yeah,
and,
exactly.
whatever, so yeah, so, I mean, honestly, a lot of the I do feel like, the quote, "targeting" of these non-citizens, like, a lot of the hair rending is a bit much, and, people just get used to certain things, about the law not being enforced, the law being enforced a certain way, and that is true, and I do think that, just setting aside the issue with ICE, economically with the tariffs and some of the regulations of these, I mean, I do worry about, the volatility, okay? Like, that's just
Sure.
well, and also, like, expected value in terms of, like, can you plan? It was a big thing in the Obama administration where, Republicans were like, "Businesses can't plan because your tax hikes and, we don't know what we're
Right.
gonna do here," and all this stuff, and, the same logic applies. So, but anyway, um, but I do think, like, the action, are causing a sea change in terms of who's coming, how many people are coming. It's just
Right.
showing that, basically, the Biden administration for 2.5 years just didn't care. Whoever was again, like, we've talked about this, I think actually Joe Biden probably was not in favor of asylum just becoming a backdoor towards staying in the United States,
Yeah.
but, he probably wasn't with it, and, the people on his staff, like, they were okay with it, they're definitely okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. The the big change, if you look at, um, the numbers of people deported so far in the Trump administration, it's not especially high compared to the past. If, um, like all the stuff about detention or other things like that, those are things that exist, like have existed for a long time. The press only notices them when there's a Republican president or whatever. But the big the big change right now seems to be that just like people are not crossing, like
Mhm.
encounters are down because people know it's like, okay, Trump's in charge. Like Democrats aren't in charge, Trump's in charge. You know, when you show up, I think there was some, I saw some report that like, in February of 2021, there were something like, I'm going to make up the number, but it was something like, uh, 30,000 people were apprehended at the border, by Border Patrol and then just let into the country. And in February 2025, it was one guy, and I would like to know about that one guy. Like he obviously is a very persuasive guy, but it's just a huge sea chain is just like people are not coming because they think like, what's the point now, right? And so that's more of like a vibes thing than a policy, but it can be very effective, and it's actually in a way, uh, the media doing is like working for Trump on this by running all these stories about like how horrible it is for immigrants and like what happens like they're deporting everybody instantly or whatever because now someone in Honduras or Venezuela or wherever they see that and they're like, you know what, I don't think I want to pay $5,000 to Coyote or whatnot, uh, in order to get over the border if I'm just gonna get like sent right back.
Yeah, and really quickly before we, move topics, I'm talking about Israel and the campus and all that stuff. Um, uh, the asylum system overall in the first world, in, like, Europe, the United States, it's just clearly broken, okay? Like, 99 it's like 99.5% or more, like, have, like, no real claims, you know? Like, according to
Right.
international law and everything like that, you have to entertain asylum seekers seriously and give people asylum who've been persecuted. But, 99.9% of these claims, it's just they're fake. Ayan Hirsi Ali got in trouble because she lied about stuff for her asylum application in the Netherlands. That's one reason she's in the United States, and, it's like people just lie all the time. Um, we need, like, regularized immigration system. We need to rationalize the current system. I don't believe in the diversity lottery. Too much family preference. There should be a little bit, but it's way too much right now. But that doesn't mean that people should just come as asylum seekers. They're, like,
Yeah.
leaving in terror from, I don't know, like, Costa Rica or something?
Yeah.
No,
You're supposed. I
there's
mean,
no yeah,
it's in the law. You're supposed to
no.
stop at the first safe country. Which, okay, if you're in Ukraine and you need to go to Poland, right? That makes sense. But if you're in South America, there's lots of safe countries before you get to the US, right? Like everywhere, basically only, for the US, it would basically only be Mexico, Canada, or maybe people who swam here from Cuba. Um, in theory, someone could get on a plane, right? But that's not how people are getting here. So yeah, it's total abuse of the system, and it's not just happening here; it's happening in Europe. So it needs to be kind of sorted out. I actually think, I mean, the first Trump administration had a good system with Remain in Mexico, where it's like, okay, um, you take away the incentive. Like what people want is they want to get here, they get the asylum plane, and then they get released into the country. The courts are not going to get to it for like 10 years or whatever, and then maybe even when they get to it and deny it, they're not going to deport you. Um, so the advantage of like Remain in Mexico, or maybe that's what Greenland is for, right? It now like you do that and you kind of remove the incentive because it's like, well, you're going to have to be cooling your heels for the 10 years in Mexico. People are not going to want to do that. So that I think was a good system. It was a real own goal that Biden got rid of it. I don't think like politically he had to do that. And I don't know if they probably can't work something out like that again now with the current Mexican government, maybe. But if not there, maybe they could do it in El Salvador, maybe they could do it in some other place, something like that. I think makes sense.
Yeah, okay, so let's, before we talk about Natal, put Natal behind the paywall, but, let's talk about, yeah, Colombia and the campuses. Colombia president just resigned as we reported. Trump administration is threatening to withhold 400 million. Colombia is, like, revising its anti-Semitism policy, putting the Mideast department under receivership. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Cambridge, Mass, and he was saying, he likes to, like, listen to Harvard people talk because I mean, there are people that have gone to Harvard in the administration, obviously, and JD went to Yale. Trump himself has like a background from Penn, University of Pennsylvania, but
Right.
Ivy League credentials. But there's a little bit of a beef between elite institutions, academic elite institutions, and the Trump administration. They're having problems, and then, they're using like laws about anti-Semitism right now, for example, to basically hammer home at the university, which I don't necessarily oppose. But
Well,
well, this is one of those things, like, I don't wanna, like, say it this way, but, like, this is I support kind of the intent and the
right.
outcomes, but I wonder about the means here, in terms of, you know, I don't know what you think. It's just for me, it's a difficult case, and, I talked to our friend Jonathan Keeperman Lomez about this last year. It's a difficult case when it comes to anti-Semitism on campus because, I think, like, as a norm, I think it should be kinda okay to express some frankly offensive views on campus. Like, let's stipulate American citizens, okay? Like, I don't want, like, packs of, like, radicalized, like, rich Pakistani students, like, screaming about Jews, right? But let's say
Right.
American citizens. I think it's good to have the free speech norms. My friend Chris Rufo, he has talked, like, pejoratively about FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, although it does more than education now. Because Chris is about results, and he's very utilitarian, very pragmatic, but, I think that it's good that there's people like there's always a Greg Lukianoff and a fire,
Yes. Right.
defending the crazy people, and sometimes they're crazy and weird, so you wouldn't even, like, think about, like I mean, there's a weird philosopher, I think, at State University of New York at Fredonia that always writes crazy papers, about,
Right.
like, how all humans should be
Like,
allowed to starve to
well,
death today, like, weird things like
yeah.
that. He's
Yeah.
obviously doing it a little bit as a troll, but also because he's a philosopher and he's, like, trying to see what he can get away with, you know?
Right.
And I know there are protests and people who have tried to, like, get rid of his tenure and all these things for years, even before the woke period, but, it was just because they took him too seriously, to be honest, but also, there have always been people like that on campus, oddballs.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I am for free speech on campus. I think you should be able to like talk about Israel if you don't like Israel or whatever. Um, I do think, like, specifically with Colombia, it does seem, like it was not that, like, you did have, uh, harassment of Jewish students, you had, like, occupation of buildings, you had other stuff that was illegal, and it seems, I didn't follow this super closely, but it seems like the Columbia administration was perhaps, like, lax. I mean, certainly they were lax in defending their Jewish students, compared to what they would be if it were, like, hypothetically, black students being harassed by, like, pro MAGA people. Not that that would happen, right? But, other stuff like that. Um, so that, to me, to my mind, like, that is a distinction, whether it's like, okay, is it like, a professor said something that you don't like in class or in a paper, or student said something you don't like, or even if there's like a protest or whatever, versus things that are, actually illegal, or, contrary to speech, if you're harassing people, uh, not even necessarily for, like, you don't even know, like, you just see someone who's wearing like a yarmulke or whatever. You haven't talked to them about what they think about Gaza, but you're like, "Oh, this is a Zionist," and you start yelling at them or whatever, and won't let them go to class. So that, I think, is a big deal. That's at least the, like, hook for the Columbia thing. That's why they're going
Yeah.
after Columbia, because these protests were on, like, every campus, but Columbia was particularly bad in letting the protesters.
Yeah, no, I have a friend I have an old friend that I've known for a long time who he's much younger than me, just to be clear, but, yes, he graduated undergrad in 2010, and he took a break, and anyway, he's back doing his master's. Columbia is Jewish, and, he was pretty upset. He was texting me, and he traveled in Syria, Jordan. He's not like a Likud guy, actually, but anyway, he was pretty traumatized, he said, by, like, the things he heard, and, people he kinda looks Jewish, he got some dirty looks, and, he was dating a woman, I mean, I'll just say, like, she was Indian American, and they broke up because of, like, the Israel issue. She was expressing
Right.
some very pro-Palestinian views, and, so there's a lot of stuff going on, and, yeah, I don't think it was good for Columbia, actually, just for its endowment and for its
Yeah.
optical, optics were bad, so in a way, it was good that they did this, and, the Trump administration using the levers that it has. Basically, they're sending these dear colleague letters and, kinda threatening them. But, famously, the Obama administration did this, I think around 2010, or no, I think it was the second term. But, dear colleague letters about, like, with Title 8, the equal protection, with the men and women, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, Title IX, you mean?
Title X, Title 9, Title 9, 8, 8, 10, like, I got all of them but 9. But yeah, so, they just basically a lot of the on-campus, rape, crisis and all these other things are in the context of that dear colleague letter, which, honestly, Obama might not have even known the details. A lot of stuff happens because staffers
Sure.
do it and they think it's a good idea, and, it just turned out that, yeah, it just turned out that it resulted in the universities acting out in really unfortunate ways. And, what the Trump administration is trying to do is use its, levers, to try to get the universities back on point, which they have not been. They have been political activist hotbeds, and it tends to be at the very elite universities. So, these are privileged kids. They expect to be able to get away with whatever they wanna do with no consequences. Recently, I saw I don't think it was on no, I think it was on campus, actually, because it was a camp student. Some young woman, um, tore down someone's poster, something about Israel. And, just to be clear, it's not like a woman in a hijab, but she's got a regular she looked like a regular college student, and, basically, they arrested her and were like, "Look, you're in trouble, blah, blah, blah," and then she was like, "Wait, why would you arrest me?"
Yeah.
That's kinda mean. That's kinda mean for you to arrest me, but it's like they have impunity, they think they don't have any consequences to their behavior, and
Right.
that's one of the things about real activism and real protest, you are open to getting arrested. But some of these
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh my god, it's gonna destroy their lives." I'm like, well, why are they risking their lives then?
Yeah.
Running around at protests? It's a social norm, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of this stuff, they don't know what the rules are because the rules haven't been enforced, so, um, but that's I mean, the best way to deal with that is just enforce the rules, and then people will wake up to it real quick.
Yeah, yeah, they will wake up, and they are waking up. They are waking up. And the universities have gotten really radicalized. The faculty's gotten more left wing. All of these things, and but at the end of the day, a lot of their money comes from the government, and the government is now in control of
Right.
people that are not sympathetic to them.
People
So
are not sympathetic
well, I
and
mean,
who are willing to use that power, yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. And like as I've said before, I've warned about this before. So in terms of sympathy, like I think we should maybe go to paywall a little early today. Our schedules have been a little crazy. Just so you guys know, it's not late night. It's very early. And I did not have as much time to record this weekend. And the primary reason was that NatalCon is here, which is a pronatalist conference.
Right.
It happened a year and a half ago in Austin. It happened in Austin again at the Bullock Museum and the AT&T Center at UT, which is it's by campus. There are a few write ups, but yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say is like the journalists. There were more of them, and I feel like it was a more mainstream conference in terms of the people who were there and, what was going on and what was being said. What was your take?
Yeah, so it was definitely because I went to the one last year, and then I went to this one, and, last year, I think, um the strategy of the conference organizers last year was no journalists basically, and they were pretty much successful at enforcing that. I think there was one or two people who managed to sneak into some event or whatever, but that was it. And there really wasn't. I mean, I think it was GQ or when there was one place that did like an article
Vanity
about
Fair. Vanity
Vanity Fair,
Fair.
okay. Yeah, but it came out, like, 3 months later and was, like, kind of a a big nothing burger or whatnot, and
It
there
was a
were
dud.
yeah, and there were a couple of, like, pre-conference, standard hit piece or whatnot, but there wasn't a huge amount of attention. This time, I mean, we'll see. There's already been a lot more pre-conference, publicity, hit pieces, other things, a lot of it just, like, very uninformed. I was reading a Wired article that said that the conference tickets cost $10,000, which is not true, and that they had like ministers on hand at the conference to marry people, like weird stuff. So, but there's been a lot of that, and the uh, clearly the philosophy of the conference organizers with regard to like media attention has changed because they credentialed a bunch of people. The Economist was there, New York Times, NPR, The Atlantic, um, all sorts of all sorts of places. Now they had some like ground rules of you had to get people's permission to quote them or whatever. Um, so, uh, but they want clearly they they wanted they were okay with getting more press attention, and it seems like there's more press attention. We actually did have protesters outside. It was I a pretty sorry group of protesters, I would have to say, maybe like half a dozen people, all wearing like COVID masks. Uh, you know, um, and they didn't last very long. They chanted some stuff for maybe like 20 minutes, and then they went home. Um, why exactly? I mean, the reasons given why this is supposed to be controversial, because it's actually like there's that old saying like motherhood and apple pie, like this is motherhood, natalism. So like, why would anybody be against it? Um, and of course, supposedly it's like caring about this is like far right, white supremacist stuff. It was pretty
Yeah.
funny. I read one article that was about the like neo Nazis who are going to be speaking at NatalCon, and the people they mentioned were Lomez, Jonathan Keeperman, who's Jewish, Cremieux, uh, who they identified as someone. I know he doesn't, whatever. Um, but the person they identified as Jewish, Crimea is Jewish, and then you're the so I don't know. Like you have to wonder, like the reporter in their brain as they're typing it in, like is there any cognitive dissonance?
Are they trolling or
Early?
what do they do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me. There was a similar article about another conference, the like manifold markets, the Manifest conference, like
Yeah,
last
yeah,
year
yeah, yeah.
they were talking about like white supremacists at that conference, and they mentioned you, uh, Brian Chow.
Anomaly. Yeah.
They didn't mention
Who's Chinese?
Anomaly.
Yeah.
You mentioned Steve Shu. Michael Lai.